Ciao Michaela.
Hi, Gaia.
Welcome everybody to State of the Art Stories for Learning. I'd like to welcome Michaela Larosse, who is the head of creative strategy and communication at the Fabricant. The Fabricant is a prominent digital fashion house with a growing community of very highly involved followers. Fashion is a cultural intensive product which mediates between a cultural context and its users, helping us to shape our individual identities. As a language, in order to be performative, it must resonate with the context. And this is where the Fabricant comes into play and becomes such an interesting entity because they produce products which transcend the physical bodies as our digital identities take up space and always more energy in our daily life. Indeed, experiences, products, and identities don't need to be physical to exist. And this is the philosophy over which the Fabricant settles and develops a new concept of beauty. Innovation, as well, in a design-driven field such as that of fashion is crucial. In the case of the Fabricant, a visionary approach merges with high-tech expertise. Michaela, this is our format. Three questions. We have a bonus one, as we said. Let me start with the first one. Can you please introduce yourself, the Fabricant, and what kind of clients you serve and which kind of needs you fulfill for them?
Certainly. So, as introduced, my name is Michaela. Everybody calls me Mickey in case that's a mouthful. I am the head of content and strategy at the Fabricant, which it's slightly multifaceted, my role, but historically I've worked with the Fabricant since day one. I developed the Fabricant's philosophy and brand tonality. So communicating our ideas and beliefs to obviously the digital world and our digital creators, and also the physical fashion industry, because a big part of what we do is trying to transition physical fashion into the digital world also. So if you have ever read the Fabricant's blog, that's me talking about our ideas, our projects, our belief system, our philosophy, and generally what we do. The Fabricant as a digital fashion house, we've had to obviously define what that is, because prior to us being established in 2018, the concept of a digital fashion house just didn't exist. So for me as a writer, that's been an amazing project. It's very exciting to write about a world that has never been spoken about before. But in practical terms, our business operates on two different strands. So we have our pure digital couture house, which everything we create there is absolutely digital, will never be physical. And the iterations that we create our digital couture garments are only purely for the use in the digital world for gaming environments, social platforms, digital marketplaces. The other strand of our business is the agency side, where we work with existing physical fashion brands, many of which I'm sure you'll all be familiar with, to bring them into the digital environment and kind of help them transition into the 3D world so they can primarily, frequently, I'll say that the request from physical fashion houses is to help make them more sustainable, which is obviously a very big facet of the digital world. When we kind of make 3D and digital interventions into, I guess, long-standing supply chain procedures, we can make a big difference there for them. Obviously, ultimately, their end product is physical. But our iterations and the way that we work with them, it only exists in the digital world. Would you like me to explain some of those? Is that the next question? I'll wait for the next
Uh,
question.
Yeah, actually, the next question is about what you just said. Always digital, never physical.
Oh,
We waste nothing but data and exploit nothing but our imagination. This is your payoff. How much do you think can we substitute or integrate our physical dimension with the digital one? Meaning, until which extent can fashion, which is and couture, which is texturized and materic, by definition, be imagined and fantasized? I was wondering which would be your next step in order to render materials synesthetically, involving more senses.
certainly, yeah. It's a really interesting one. I guess we've historically thought of the idea as fashion as a very tactile, very physical experience. So of course there's this mindset shift required. Frequently when I talk to people who haven't heard of digital fashion before, they'll say, what do you mean? What do you mean fashion does not exist? It has to be physical. But it requires a slight sort of shift in the way that you think about it. If we think of fashion as an experience, and a way of experiencing expression, sort of, you don't need physicality to feel. You don't need physicality to feel emotions. And our emotions can be provoked by all kinds of stimulus that is non-physical. When I've spoken about what we do on the blog and the way that we communicate it, a way for people to comprehend what we're talking about, I describe it as thought couture, not haute couture, which works very well in English. I have to say, maybe it doesn't work so well in other languages, but it works well in English. So when we talk about thought couture, we mean couture that exists beyond the physical, just like a thought. Because if we think, they absolutely exist, our thoughts, but they're not physical. So there is a way for something to exist non-physically that we all experience, obviously, on a daily basis. So people go, oh, right, of course, something non-physical can exist. So for us, it's about transitioning the feeling of fashion, the emotion of fashion, the experience of fashion into a place that's an entirely new definition of what fashion can be, where you really can, because obviously non-physicality and in the digital realm, there are no boundaries, there's no gravity, there are no rules, no limitations.
Abstracting the limit actually enhances the poetry.
Yeah,
Moda pensiero, in Italian that would be.
It's wonderful because suddenly you have this open goal for the imagination. You can step into a space and explore parts of yourself that you can't in the physical realm. So you can be whoever you want to be. The garments that you can wear obviously don't have to conform to physical boundaries. They can be made of anything. Our iterations actually tend to have one foot in the classical fashion realm, because that's our aesthetic and that's the way that our creative director Amber likes to express, and that's the aesthetic that we lead with. But on paper, you can be anything that you want to be. I could see how it feels to be a man for a day, or a fish, for example, if I felt like it. Your digital self can be anything you want it to be. And your fashion expression, the way you choose to express your identity, can be anything that you wish. So it can change with your mood. So the materials, when we're talking about materials in the digital realm, they can be, made of, as I mentioned previously, thunderclouds. You can wear a garment made of emotion, if you wish, or made of thunderstorms, or made of light. So suddenly the creative expression of fashion suddenly opens up into this limitless dimension, which creatively I feel is really wonderfully exciting, and a great space for physical fashion brands to step into and begin to iterate beyond physical materiality. The software that we use, and which many people use in the digital fashion space, you can iterate all kinds of fabrics that are familiar. So it will, you can drape and fit a dress that mimics exactly the behavior of silk or tweed or linen. And that capacity is there. So when you using the software, you will pulling, you can see on my black gown, it will pull this fabric, which is cotton, in exactly the same way. So it behaves exactly the same way in the software, and it mimics the physicality but transitions it into this digital realm. So the look and feel of fit that you can create is the same as the physical world if you wish, but obviously it doesn't exist at all in the material sense.
So basically, we could say that the absence of involvement of certain senses is actually not a limit, but it allows the experience to be limitless. Now I can see how the switch that you were suggesting, it took me a while, I have to say, to grasp this shift. Now I can see that. I totally can.
Yeah, it takes a moment, you know, and it's entirely valid to ask questions about what we do, because obviously we're used to the physicality of fashion. It's really interesting. We've sort of allowed for it in other creative worlds. I remember, you know, when music transitioned to the digital environment, people were like, no, that just can't be. But we got over that quite quickly.
Yeah. Yeah.
But now it's like, well, of course, you know, we can access music. So music is this very physical, very sensual and sensory experience that we now have no problem thinking about as a digital experience or a non-physical experience. Fashion hasn't made that journey yet. It's just beginning. And it does require a mindset shift. And because we obviously are used to garments being worn on the skin, and fashion clearly has a very practical application. It protects us and it covers us. But yeah, it does require a moment to kind of pause and think of it. And then once you kind of get the hook in your head and you realize the possibilities of the non-physical realm, I think for me personally, and lots of the 3D creators that we work with, it's so exciting from an innovation perspective and a creativity perspective. For all creative people to be able to be given this new palette of expression, and for us as consumers, because I'm a consumer also, to be able to have this moment to completely explore different parts of your identity and try new parts of yourself, and garments that you could never possibly have imagined because they just weren't possible, you know.
Yeah, so it's a matter of identity more than the role of fashion pertaining the need we have to cover it ourselves. It's more about how to shape our identity through the fashion language we adopt.
Absolutely. And you know, we're all used to on digital platforms, used to curating our identity to some
Yeah.
degree already. You know, you look at Instagram, um, everybody, you know, will get their best angle and their best light, and you know, and show themselves in environments that they like to be seen in. So we're already doing that already. Obviously, that's a physical to digital transition. But when we, you know, you could create, for example, digital Gaia that could be any version of yourself that you want it to be. Your avatar in the digital space can express a very literal version of yourself, or it could be a very, you know, wild expression of yourself, whatever you choose to be. Yeah, exactly. So identity is what we tend to talk about, and expressing your identity and exploring who you can be in the digital realm. When we think of ourselves as digital beings, we call them digisapiens, by the way, because we wanted a new
Yes.
language. Digisapiens. So it's like Homo sapien is what we are now in our physical selves. So who are we when we move to the digital environment? We become digisapien. So who are you as a digisapien, and what is that identity that you want to explore and express, and what can it be, and what new possibilities are there, which, you know, when you can obviously make that initial shift to fashion being non-physical, it's a really kind of a multi-dimensional thing.
Yeah.
I guess if people are used to the gaming environment,
Right.
also one of the best ways to think about it, or the most kind of globally understood, because anybody that's been in the gaming environment, you go into that environment, you can choose a skin, as they're called in the gaming environment. You can iterate yourself as a character, which is an avatar, and roam around these worlds, and dress that character in digital garments. And they're quite fantastical in that environment, or they're obviously aligned with whatever the theme of the game is. But with digital fashion, it can exist beyond the gaming environment. You can enter different digital worlds, and really begin to explore who you are and who you can be, using a different fashion identity.
This is so interesting, and it transcends. Uh, I hope no one will be offended by this, but it transcends the vanity, the ephemeral that sometimes fashion has been associated to. We are really talking about adopting a different identity to perhaps feeling different in a way. So that would be an extra step to take in our philosophical conversation about the Fabricant. But let me ask you one thing about your collaborations with fashion brands, such as Puma, Off-White, Under Armour, Buffalo London, Adidas. Your focus collaborating with them is the phygital dimension, so merging physical and digital, as you already briefly explained in your introduction, in order to help them deliver an extraordinary, interactive brand experience to their consumers. If you feel like telling us the features of one or two of these collaborations that you think are representative.
Yeah, I was actually thinking of one that we did, this almost classic phygital expression that we did in the early days of the Fabricant. We worked with a luxury fashion retailer in Hong Kong called IT. They're very well known in the Chinese and Hong Kong fashion environment. They created, it was their 30th anniversary, and they got lots of designers to create their 30th anniversary collection. So special pieces like, I think I remember, the one that I can remember is a hoodie by Off-White, and I think there was something by Alexander McQueen. So it's a really amazing spectrum of designers, all physical. But they were one of the very early adopters that could see the possibilities of the digital fashion environment. And as you say, this expression of the phygital. So they wanted to just show a new, exciting way of delivering these garments to their audience. So we worked with them to create digital assets. So we recreated the garments entirely in 3D. These garments were obviously physical. We recreated them in 3D. And then we created pop-up stores all over Hong Kong, which were big digital screens. So when consumers first saw the garments, they didn't see them physically. There were no physical garments on display whatsoever. They could go to a screen. They saw our 3D iterations of the garments, which are kind of hyper-real, sort of flawless recreations of the garments. Then the garments, obviously, because it's 3D, they can walk and move and dance by themselves and give you a 360. And they could go to the screen, work out if their size was available, order directly via the screen, and put in their details, and then the physical garment would arrive at their house the next day. So it was this really exciting moment where people were, and it sold out instantly, by the way. It was amazing. And it was just really exciting for people to see this new expression of fashion. They were obviously aware of what they were looking at were 3D iterations, because quite clearly the way the garments were moving were physically impossible. But they were willing to order right there and then and receive the physical garment. But never having seen it before physically, which is obviously goes against the grain of everything that you're supposed to do in fashion merchandising, of course. So it was really beautiful and a really nice expression, and they're very sort of great to see someone that was willing to just boldly step into this space and really experiment in a way that was really successful for them and really did justice to what they were trying to do, talking about themselves as I guess as a retailer that had 30 years of experience and was willing to, define what the future of fashion retail could be. So that was a really nice expression. The one that we did very recently. Oh, sorry, Guy, please.
The use of phygital on a retail level, super interesting. It would actually solve a lot of perhaps of frictions that people tend to have at the moment to go in very crowded places, to interact with another human being, to purchase something. So that would actually take away some of the cold experience of just shopping online by actually seeing the product in a different way. Bellissimo.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people working right now to get the kind of flawless digital try-on that we'd all like to have with a digital garment. The tech is some way there, and I guess a familiar expression of it right now might be a filter. For our iterations, we'd like it to be a bit more flawless because obviously our garments are super labor intensive. But we're getting there. So people will be able to order online, via some screen kind of interaction, try on the garments, see what they look like, work out what their size is, and order. That is coming. So the digital try-on, I guess, is what lots of fashion brands will be excited about for the reasons that you're talking about. Lots of people don't necessarily like going to stores and waiting in line at the changing room, and then and it doesn't quite fit, and then you want another size, and we all know what happens in those environments. So that's a very exciting expression for retail. The one that I'd also like to draw your attention to is the project that we did with Buffalo London earlier this year. So Buffalo London, again, a classic fashion iteration. They do these platform soul trainers that I guess most people were familiar with from the 1990s and the Spice era. They made them famous.
Rave parties in Buffalo, London.
Exactly, classic Buffalo London stack trainers. They, again, were very bold and said, we realize that digital fashion is a conversation that we'd like to bring to our consumers. They've never done anything like this before. They've always been physical. And they wanted to co-create a collaboration based on one of their classic shoes. So again, the Fabricant iterated their shoe in 3D. We built a 3D model of it. And collaboratively, we came up with the idea of covering the design, covering the shoe in flames. Obviously, one could never have a shoe. We called it the classic burning for. You could never obviously wear a shoe that is on fire in the physical world. So it was really quite fun to do this expression. And they wanted to start the conversation about digital fashion because they feel it's very important from a sustainability perspective. And they intend to make it part of their business model. It doesn't mean they're suddenly going to stop selling physical footwear because that is their business, but they also wanted to present this idea. So the classic burning for shoe, which is clearly digital because it's on fire, and could only be worn in the digital realm. They took this amazing step, which they deserve all kudos for, of putting it on their website right next to their physical inventory. So you could order one of their physical shoes, or you could see there's a whole space dedicated to the classic burning for. You could order your digital only shoe. And when you clicked buy, you were required to upload your chosen image of yourself. And then the shoes were digitally fitted to you, and you would end up with an image that you could share across socials of you wearing this impossible garment, obviously, that was purely digital. As we've already said this, we've been in this environment for 3 years already, and we're used to having this kind of conversation. Their consumers had never seen this idea before. So it was like, oh what? You want us to buy something digital. Why is this important? And it allowed them to have a conversation with their consumers that were very used to the whole, as we all are, physicality of fashion, and allowed them to start thinking of what fashion can be when it's digital and how playful it is, how fun it can be. We got loads of really cool images of people wearing their digital sneakers. It allowed them to talk about the sustainability of digital fashion, because if you're not making anything physical, you're not taking raw materials out of the ground. You're not flying things across the planet and putting carbon into the atmosphere. Having things delivered. So it allows you to have these conversations, which are very important to have, as we all know. Our planetary circumstances demand that we have these conversations.
Just a different way to bring it up.
I beg your pardon?
It's just a different way to bring it up.
Different way to bring it up. So of course, sustainable fashion, physical fashion is very valid, and we have to look at new ways to create garments that that reduce plastic or reuse materials. The circular economy conversation is incredibly important, using waste as a resource. But clearly in the digital fashion world, because we don't create anything, there is no waste. So it's a different route into the conversation of sustainability, and one that's very valid to have. And it's a way of iterating fashion and using fashion again to express yourself with a whole new palette of reference where people can enjoy and express themselves. As we've talked about previously, we're now in this world where we frequently, as we are right now, expressing ourselves or communicating or socializing via screens. When you have a screen as an interface, you don't need to create anything physical. So there's a real opportunity to play with your identity and express yourself and use all the benefits of digital fashion to talk about it and to be really playful and yeah, enjoy fashion in a way that is different and fun and but really relevant. You know, it's not a novelty idea. It's very relevant to the way that we are living now and the way that we'll need to express ourselves with fashion in future because of this environmental conversation that is very important.
Actually, I guess Mr. Capucci would find your project so interesting. It would be interesting to ask him. But I have a bonus question for you that I
Yes,
received through LinkedIn.
another bonus question.
Yeah, we love the bonus question. When we met the first time, you told me that all your colleagues that work in the creative department come from classical studies of physical fashion. So they have studied draping, flat pattern making, tailoring. We were wondering, how does their working space, their working studio look like? Does it look like any other fashion house in some way, or is it just completely different?
Yeah, it would be different to, I guess, the image that you have. So we work in a digital atelier, and in our digital atelier, obviously, we don't have scissors and cutting tables. We we work on high resolution screens. Our team, using the software, will quite literally stitch together the garments. So the process is very familiar. Amber, our creative director, and our other digital fashion designers, they're all classically trained, which for the Fabricant, and not all digital fashion, there are other digital fashion houses, of course, and their expression doesn't necessarily require this, but our aesthetic, this is what we believe in. All our team are classically trained, so as you say, they understand drape and fit and the weight and feel of fabric. And for our iterations, which are digital couture, we believe that's very important because we want to, I guess one of our challenging things that's just part of the digital world is really creating this emotional connection with what we're doing. And because they come from that emotional experience of physical fashion, they're able to really talk about it in classical fashion terms, but iterate it digitally.
That is actually clear in the last project you just released, Renaissance.
Yes,
Yeah. That happening exactly how you're telling me.
Yeah, and that was a really wonderful project. So yeah, if people come to see our digital atelier, they will see a space with people working diligently on screens. I love seeing everybody's work. I'm always kind of the person standing behind and go, ooh, can you just give a little? And it's so nice to see. But conversationally, I guess what will be familiar actually is the conversations that happen. They're very fashion centric. They're about how to, express the garment beautifully. Is it moving? Is the fabric moving the way that we'd like? Is it falling in the way that we want? Is the light falling in? Because obviously, in the digital environment, you're taking in lighting as a factor, and you're also taking visual effects as a factor. So there's layers of creation that are happening. So our digital designers will iterate the garment, and the conceptual process, I would feel, is very familiar to classically trained fashion, in that we put together digital mood boards. There's a lot of inspiration. There's a lot of discussion about themes and ideas, and how best to bring all those together digitally, so we obviously iterate the garment that we want. The great thing, obviously, is the team are able to work collectively on a design because they can access the file. So people will be iterating and having discussions about the fabric and the weight and the mood and the feel, and the idea behind the collection. but all of the iteration is obviously happening digitally. Within that ecosystem, there's our 3D team who are creating an environment for it to live in. There's our visual effects people who are lighting and adding these beautiful visual effects details to really bring the garment to life as something that feels like fashion, but with a beautiful sort of digital iteration.
Che bello. Michaela, thank you very much. You have been so inspiring on many different levels, and it has been a beautiful experience. I will follow you on the blog, and I hope everybody found this conversation as interesting as I did. Grazie
Thank
mille.
you so much for inviting me, Gaia. I really appreciate it, and I hope your students enjoy kind of getting a little download on everything that digital fashion can be. It's a really exciting world to be in.
Grazie mille.
Thank you so much.